The air hangs thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket of mist and the stench of blood. A man, barely more than a boy, stands shoulder to shoulder with his brethren, his knuckles white as he grips the smooth yew of his longbow. Around him, a symphony of chaos unfolds, a whirlwind of flashing steel, the desperate cries of the wounded, and the thunderous roar of thousands of voices locked in a deadly chorus. The very ground beneath his feet, a churned morass of mud and gore, seems to suck at his boots, threatening to pull him down into its bloody embrace. For this single, desperate moment, the fate of a kingdom hangs in the balance. An entire army, outnumbered and ravaged by sickness, stands on the brink of annihilation deep within enemy territory. Defeat here means not just death, but the end of a king's ambition and the utter humiliation of a proud nation. The stakes could not be higher. Every man on this field knows that survival is a fleeting hope, and glory a prize that will be paid for in blood. Every arrow loosed is a prayer, every sword stroke a desperate gamble for one more breath. At the heart of this maelstrom of violence stands a young king, his armor stained with mud and the blood of his enemies. He is not a distant commander, observing the battle from a safe vantage point, but a warrior in the thick of the fray, his sword arm rising and falling with grim determination. He is a leader who has shared the hardships of his men, who has marched alongside them, starved with them, and now bleeds with them. His presence is a beacon of hope in the midst of despair, a symbol of defiance against impossible odds. Who is this young monarch, and what twist of fate has led him and his beleaguered army to this bloody field in the heart of France? What desperate courage drives these men to stand against a force that dwarfs them in number, a sea of shining armor and noble banners that threatens to swallow them whole? Can the skill of a common man with a longbow truly overcome the might of a mounted knight, the pinnacle of medieval warfare? What is the name of this hallowed ground, where history is about to be forged in the crucible of battle? The king is Henry V of England, and this is the Battle of Agincourt. Against all odds, his small, exhausted army achieves a victory so stunning it will be spoken of in hushed, reverent tones for centuries to come. The English longbowmen, with their deadly volleys of arrows, decimate the French knights as they struggle through the thick mud. The flower of French nobility is cut down, and a new chapter in the bloody saga of the 100 Years' War is written in the blood-soaked soil of this French field. History is not merely a sequence of events, but a tapestry woven from moments of impossible courage and desperate gambles. The Battle of Agincourt stands as a testament to the fact that in the crucible of conflict, it is not always the strongest or the most numerous who prevail, but those who dare to stand firm when all hope seems lost. It is a stark reminder that the course of nations can be altered in a single day by the will of a determined few. The story of Agincourt does not begin on the battlefield, but in the halls of power and the ambitions of a young king eager to legitimize his claim to the throne. Henry V, his reign still fresh and his crown not yet secure from internal threats, saw in the turmoil of a divided France an opportunity to resurrect an old claim and unite his own kingdom against a common foe. The 100 Years' War, a long and brutal conflict, had simmered for decades, but Henry's invasion in the summer of 1415 was a bold and audacious move to reignite the flames. The campaign began with the Siege of Harfleur, a costly and brutal affair that dragged on for 5 long weeks. Though the town eventually fell, the victory came at a terrible price. The English army was decimated by disease, with dysentery sweeping through the ranks, leaving a trail of death and misery. With his forces drastically reduced and the campaigning season drawing to a close, Henry made the fateful decision to march his weary army overland to the English-held port of Calais, a journey deep through hostile territory. The French, however, were not idle. A massive army, a glittering host of the kingdom's greatest nobles and knights, was assembled to crush the impudent English invader. They shadowed Henry's movements, blocking his path at the river Somme and forcing the English on a grueling detour. The French were confident, their numerical superiority overwhelming. They saw a trapped and weakened prey, an army ripe for destruction. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would pit desperate courage against overwhelming might. The night before the battle was a study in contrasts. The French camp was a scene of boisterous confidence, with the knights gambling for the ransom of the English nobles they were certain to capture. In the English camp there was a somber silence, a quiet contemplation of the fate that awaited them at dawn. The rain fell relentlessly, turning the freshly plowed field that separated the two armies into a quagmire of thick, clinging mud, a factor that would prove to be of unforeseen and decisive importance. As dawn broke on the 25th of October, 1415, St. Crispin's Day, the two armies faced each other across the narrow, muddy plain. The battlefield itself was a crucial element, a strip of open land flanked by dense woods that would prevent the French from bringing their superior numbers to bear in a flanking maneuver. This geography, a natural choke point, would force the French to advance into a narrow front, a killing ground perfectly suited to the English strategy. Henry V, aware of the fear and doubt that gripped his men, is said to have delivered a speech that would become the stuff of legend. While the exact words are lost to history, the sentiment is clear. He spoke not of survival but of honor. He spoke of a brotherhood forged in the crucible of battle, a band of brothers whose deeds on this day would be remembered for all time. It was a masterful piece of leadership, a call to arms that transformed a desperate gamble into a glorious endeavor. The English army was a stark contrast to the French host. While the French were a magnificent spectacle of chivalry, clad in shining plate armor, the English were a more practical and deadly force. The vast majority of Henry's army, nearly 80%, were longbowmen, common men whose skill with their deadly weapon was the cornerstone of English military power. They were lightly armored, giving them a crucial advantage of mobility in the thick mud that would so hamper their heavily armored opponents. The English longbow was a fearsome weapon, a 6-foot stave of yew capable of unleashing a storm of arrows with incredible force and accuracy. An experienced archer could loose up to a dozen arrows a minute, creating a cloud of arrows that could darken the sky and rain death upon an advancing enemy. It was a weapon that had proven its worth in previous battles of the 100 Years' War, and at Agincourt it would have its finest and most terrible hour. Henry's tactics were born of necessity and a keen understanding of his army's strengths. He positioned his men-at-arms in the center, a solid core of steel, with his longbowmen on the flanks in a wedge formation. In front of the archers, a line of sharpened stakes was driven into the ground, a simple but brutally effective defense against a cavalry charge. This palisade would turn the tide of the battle, transforming the archers' vulnerable positions into deadly fortresses. The French, for their part, were a magnificent but unwieldy force. Their army was a collection of noble retinues, each vying for honor and glory, which led to a lack of cohesive command and a disregard for sound military strategy. They placed their faith in the traditional shock tactic of a massive cavalry charge, confident that the sheer weight of their numbers and the quality of their armor would sweep the English from the field. This arrogance, this belief in the invincibility of the chivalric ideal, would be their undoing. The battle began not with a thunderous charge, but with a tense and protracted standoff. For several hours, the two armies faced each other across the muddy field, neither willing to make the first move. The French, confident in their position, expected the English to launch a desperate, suicidal attack. Henry, however, knew that his strength lay in defense. He needed to provoke the French into advancing into his carefully prepared killing ground. Finally, Henry gave the order to advance. His army moved forward, a slow and deliberate maneuver, carrying their sharpened stakes with them. They repositioned themselves within extreme longbow range of the French lines, a bold and provocative move that the French could not ignore. The gauntlet had been thrown down. The English had chosen their ground, and now they dared the French to come and take it. The French nobility, incensed by this impudence, finally began their ponderous advance. The French attack was a disaster from the very beginning. The initial cavalry charge, intended to smash through the English archers on the flanks, was met with a storm of arrows. The sharpened stakes, a brutal and unexpected obstacle, created chaos and confusion. Horses, wounded and maddened with pain, bolted and trampled the advancing infantry, turning the charge into a tangled wreck of men and beasts. The muddy ground, churned into a bloody mire by the struggling hooves, became a deadly trap. With the cavalry charge broken, the main body of the French army, thousands of dismounted men-at-arms, began their slow, agonizing advance. Weighed down by heavy plate armor, they sank to their knees in the thick mud, each step a monumental effort. The English longbowmen, from their protected positions on the flanks, unleashed a relentless torrent of arrows into the struggling mass of men. The French were being slaughtered before they had even reached the English lines. The sheer press of numbers became a weapon turned against the French. As the first line of knights was cut down, the following ranks pushed forward, trampling the dead and wounded underfoot. The narrow battlefield became a scene of unimaginable horror, a writhing mass of men so tightly packed that many were unable to even lift their arms to strike a blow. Some knights knocked to the ground were literally drowned in the mud, their heavy armor a death shroud from which they could not escape. As the exhausted and bloodied remnants of the French vanguard finally reached the English line, they were met by the lightly armored and more mobile English men-at-arms. But it was the longbowmen who delivered the final, decisive blow. Leaving their bows, they charged into the melee with swords, axes, and mallets, their agility a deadly advantage against the encumbered and exhausted French knights. The slaughter was immense, the flower of French chivalry cut down in a brutal, close-quarters struggle. At the height of the battle, a moment of crisis threatened to turn the tide. A French raiding party attacked the lightly defended English baggage train at the rear of the army. Henry, fearing that the large number of French prisoners he had taken might be inspired to rejoin the fight, made a ruthless and controversial decision. He ordered the execution of the prisoners, a brutal but, in his eyes, necessary act to secure his victory. The Battle of Agincourt was a victory of staggering proportions. The English, outnumbered and on the brink of collapse, had not only survived, but had utterly destroyed a vastly superior French army. The French losses were catastrophic, with thousands killed, including a significant portion of the nobility. English casualties, in contrast, were remarkably light, numbering in the hundreds. It was a military achievement that defied belief, a testament to tactical genius and the indomitable spirit of a desperate army. The aftermath of the battle was a scene of grim and bloody finality. The field was littered with the bodies of the French nobility, a testament to the devastating effectiveness of the English longbow. Henry, his victory secure, resumed his march to Calais, his small army now unmolested. He returned to England a conquering hero, his throne secure and his name etched into the annals of military history. For France, the defeat at Agincourt was a national catastrophe. The loss of so many of its leaders plunged the kingdom into a deeper crisis, exacerbating the internal divisions and civil strife that had already weakened the country. The battle was a devastating blow to the French psyche, a humiliation that would take years to overcome. It was a stark and brutal lesson in the changing nature of warfare, a demonstration that the age of the chivalric knight was drawing to a bloody close. The long-term consequences of Agincourt were profound. The victory paved the way for further English conquests in France and led to the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, which recognized Henry V as the heir to the French throne. Though Henry would die before he could claim his prize, the battle had a lasting impact on the course of the 100 Years' War and the relationship between England and France. It was a turning point, a moment that reshaped the political landscape of Europe. The legend of Agincourt has endured for centuries, a story of underdog triumph that has captured the imagination of generations. It has been immortalized in literature and film, most famously in William Shakespeare's play Henry V, which has shaped the popular perception of the battle and its hero. The story of the band of brothers has become a powerful symbol of courage and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The battle also marked a significant shift in military tactics. It demonstrated the supremacy of infantry armed with ranged weapons over the traditional dominance of heavy cavalry. The success of the English longbowmen at Agincourt heralded a new era of warfare, one in which the common soldier could play a decisive role on the battlefield. It was a lesson that would be learned and relearned in the bloody conflicts that followed. The mystery of Agincourt is not simply how the English won, but how the French lost so catastrophically. It was a perfect storm of factors: arrogance, poor leadership, unfavorable terrain, and a failure to adapt to new military realities. The French were not defeated by a superior weapon alone, but by a combination of their own mistakes and the tactical brilliance of their opponent. It is a cautionary tale of the dangers of overconfidence and the importance of sound strategy. In the end, the Battle of Agincourt is more than just a historical event. It is a story of human drama, of courage and fear, of ambition and desperation. It is a story of a young king who gambled everything and won, of an army that stared into the abyss of defeat and found the strength to triumph. It is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of a victory that will echo through the ages. The legacy of Agincourt is a complex one. It is a source of national pride for England, a symbol of its martial prowess and its ability to overcome adversity. For France, it is a painful memory of a devastating defeat, a wound that has long since healed but has not been forgotten. It is a shared history, a bloody chapter in the long and often turbulent relationship between two great nations. The battlefield of Agincourt today is a quiet and peaceful place, a stark contrast to the scene of carnage that unfolded there 6 centuries ago. But the echoes of the past remain, a silent testament to the men who fought and died on this hallowed ground. It is a place of remembrance, a reminder of the human cost of war and the enduring power of a story that continues to fascinate and inspire. The story of Agincourt is a reminder that history is not just about dates and events, but about people. It is about the hopes and fears of the soldiers who stood on that muddy field, the ambitions of the king who led them, and the consequences of the choices they made. It is a story that continues to resonate because it speaks to something fundamental about the human condition, the capacity for both incredible bravery and terrible violence. The final, lingering mystery of Agincourt is the question of what might have been. What if the French had not been so arrogant? What if the rain had not turned the battlefield into a quagmire? What if the English had lost their nerve? History is full of such questions, tantalizing glimpses of alternate paths that were never taken. But on that fateful day in October 1415, the path was chosen and the world was changed forever.